It's now Wednesday, the 5th of July, little after 10 o'clock in the evening. The moon probably won't be out until after 11 o'clock. By that time, I hope my head will have hit the pillow and it will have knocked me out for a good night's sleep. What you're looking at here is Messier 4. I use it as a reference globular cluster. Due to its proximity, 7,200 light years, its size, 26.3 arc minutes, its magnitude of 5.4. It's located very close to Antares and Scorpius. Kind of southern, minus 26 degrees, but it's got about 10 degrees above the lowest point that I can actually observe. Frankly, right at this moment, it is probably, the scope looks pretty even. It's very close to culmination. Tonight, what I want to do is revisit a few NGC globular clusters that were of interest the previous night, plus some new ones I discovered that I wanted to add on that weren't part of my observing list. And then I want to start at NGC 6400 and do some adventitious studies of whatever pops up that's of any interest, beginning with NGC 6400, which should be pretty close to culminating by the time I get there. So, without further ado, I'll just mention that we're at 128 flood, 42 decibels of auto gain control. This next study, I almost convinced myself that I had actually turned up last night. It's deep south, minus 37 degrees, almost 17th hour in terms of right ascension. It's a globular cluster in Scorpius, NGC 6256. The interesting thing about it is it's a magnitude 11.3 globular cluster, some 30,000 light years distant. Very small size, a little bit more than an arc minute, 1.2 arc minutes. Now, I get a better view of it tonight than last. But it seems to me the globular cluster, the ghost of an 11.3 magnitude globular cluster is located right about there on the screen. It hasn't quite culminated, which means I will probably come back to revisit it before we begin an exploration of NGCs that are adventitious later this evening. But it does look like we're actually turning up something on the screen. So let's go ahead and revisit NGC 6256. In probably about a half an hour it should be culminating. This is a globular cluster, NGC 6287 in Ophiuchus, that I turned up last night under probably slightly poorer conditions, so it'll make a nice comparison. NGC 6287, a globular cluster in Ophiuchus, magnitude 9.2, very obvious on the screen. 2.7 arc minutes in size. Its brightest stars are magnitude 14.5. It's a class 7, 27,000 light years distant. And given the fact that something like Messier 13 is 25,000 light years distant, 3 magnitudes plus brighter, and 10 times as large, it tells you that NGC 6287 is a rather dwarfish, loosely constructed globular cluster. And its location is probably on the border between our half and the far half of the Milky Way core. NGC 6342 is a globular cluster in Ophiuchus, magnitude 9.5. It's about 3 arc minutes in size. Its brightest stars are magnitude 15. It's a class 4 globular, which means fairly condensed, 30,000 light years distant. And I do believe this is our first look, although It's got a very rich field, beautiful stars, and I do believe we looked at one last night that had a similarly rich field, and it may very well have been 6342 that we looked at last night. Skipping through the catalog here, seeing if there might be something adventitious. Okay, we're going to move on to NGC 6355, but first I'm going to shut the camera down. NGC 6355, another globular cluster in Ophiuchus, is magnitude 8.6, a little bit larger, 6.1 arc minutes, 23,000 light years distant. This baby is about 3 magnitudes fainter once again and about the same distance as Messier 13. But it's at minus 26 degrees in terms of its declination. It too has a pretty nice stellar field, however. Like 6342, which I believe was our last study. I'm going to make a hop to NGC 6356, another globular cluster in Ophiuchus. This particular globular cluster we're going to is about as bright as the faintest of the Messier globular clusters. An example of that would be Messier 56, which I believe is 8.1 or 8.2. This particular globular cluster, NGC 6356, however, as you can see on the screen, is highly condensed. So on the scale of 1 to 12, in Roman numerals of course, what might you think this one is? And I'll tell you in a second. NGC 6356, globular cluster Ophiuchus, magnitude 8.2, fairly small, 3.5 arc minutes. Magnitude 15 is its brightest stars, and that tells you something there because the delta between the brightest stars and the globular itself is almost 7 magnitudes. This baby is distant on the far side of the galaxy, 54,000 light years, and drum roll please, it's a class 2. Which is almost the densest form of globular cluster, which is a class 1, and this baby lives in a very rich stellar field. Give the camera a break, go to our next study. Well, can you find it on the screen? And what class might it be? NGC 6366, globular cluster Ophiuchus, collective magnitude of 9.5, 5.8 arc minutes in size, and you would suspect its brightest stars are probably somewhere in the 4 plus magnitude range, and you'd be right, magnitude 13.6 compared to a 9.5. It is a class 11, a mere 12,000 light years distant. So diffuse and not much of a delta between the brighter stars, fairly large, almost 6 arc minutes. In Ophiuchus, very close to the celestial equator, minus 5 degrees. Now, that takes me to the end of the list of globulars that I wanted to visit in early summer. However, I do want to go back to 61-56, although I think I'll jump all the way to 6139 if we can. I do believe that one was obstructed by being too low. So, there's our view. Well, we're back to NGC 6256. I do believe we can see it right about there. That's that 11.3 magnitude globular cluster in Scorpius, 30,000 light years distant, deep south, minus 37 degrees. I would say it's within 15 minutes of culminating, which is, this is the best view we're going to get. Given the conditions of the sky, I'll have to revisit again on a really good dark night. No sign of moonshine yet. So this moon is not intoxicating the firmament. So we're probably getting a pretty good view, although I think there's quite a bit of atmospheric water up there. You can see it. The sky is lost color, so we are into sky dark, also known as astronomical dusk. So with this view, we're going to get off the list of studies I wanted to either discover new or revisit. We're going to start with NGC 6400 and pick out maybe a half dozen studies of interest, beginning with NGC 6400 if it's of interest, and then moving forward. As it turned out, NGC 6400 was an open cluster, but it was too far south to get a good view. 6401, however, happened to be a globular cluster, and I'll give you data on that. You can watch it assemble on the screen. Looks very oblate to me. Could easily be like an elliptical galaxy. But I will give you the data on 6401 as the image takes form. Very nice field of stars. NGC 6401 is a globular cluster in Ophiuchus. Pretty bright, magnitude 7.4, although small, 1 arc minute, which might explain why it wasn't seen as a globular cluster or noticed by Messier. It's a class 9, 2400 light years distant. 1 arc minute in size. Wow. That's rather extraordinary. We're about seeing most of it right there, although the core is very extended. It almost looks like some kind of a spiral, irregular galaxy rather than being a globular cluster. There's our view. Nice, rich stellar field. What we have here is a faint open cluster in Scorpius, NGC 6404, magnitude 10.6, 5 arc minutes consisting of about 50 stars. It's a type 3, so that's III3, which I'll have to familiarize myself with. 7,800 light years distant, minus 33 degrees in declination. Should be kind of hard to make. It's quite obviously an open cluster in this region here. I'm very interested in relative ranges and things. Most open clusters are usually less than 10,000 light years distant. Globulars less than 100,000. And we've seen galaxies already as distant almost 1 billion light years away. So the brightest stars it is not saying in this cluster, but it is 7,800 light years distant. There are other open clusters we can go to, but in fact, what I prefer to do is skip around and see a variety of studies this evening. I've noticed there are an awful lot of, I've always known there are a lot of galaxies in Draco, which we cannot see from the observatory roof. But Hercules is replete with galaxies. This one happens to be magnitude 13.1, 1.4 by 1.3 arc minutes, so pretty much a face-on. It's NGC 6417. It's a spiral with a large bar and a small b, 152 million light years distant. It's probably a super dwarf-sized galaxy given its apparent size. And boy, it's sharing the field with something very bright here, probably a star, but the galaxy is quite apparent there at magnitude 13.1. We're seeing the core, we're seeing the extensions. I'm not seeing a ring, however, although that may be more apparent, but it doesn't list it having a ring, but it does show as a large bar. So that's quite apparent. Another rich field of stars. So I'm going to keep skipping through the catalog here until I find the next study of interest. I'd like to do something deep tonight in the 15 to 16th magnitude range. Ooh, there's a globular cluster in Ophiuchus, 6426. Why don't we hop there? Let me shut down the camera first. NGC 6246. Oh, 6246. How did that end up getting? I put the wrong number in. I'm sorry. Let me just go back. Should be 6426. It's going to be of interest because it's almost an 11th magnitude galaxy, globular cluster, and it's in a part of the sky that should reveal it quite well. 6426, I believe. Yeah, it's quite apparent on the screen. I'd really love to catch some 12th magnitude galaxies, but this is pushing up towards 11. NGC 6426 is a globular cluster in Ophiuchus, magnitude 10.9, 3.2 arc minutes. Its brightest stars are 15.2. That means it's a delta of about 4 magnitudes. So but it's quite distant, 65,000 light years. It's a class 9, and its declination is above the celestial equator, which puts it in a nice part of the sky. I'm actually kind of impressed with that magnitude 11. I think we should be able to get to magnitude 12 under good conditions. And so maybe some of those polymers would be available if they were actually on the database associated with Gemini 2 controller. What should be forming on the screen at some location is a faint galaxy, NGC 6446, galaxy in Hercules, magnitude 15.5, 0.7 by 0.6 arc minutes. It's a spiral with a lowercase ab, 326 million light years distant. And I believe the Andromeda galaxy would have an apparent size of about 1 arc minute. So this is about the size of our own galaxy, potentially a similar brightness at a distance of 326 million light years. NGC 6446, and I'm not in a good position to tell where it is, but I do believe I'm seeing it right there. And it's pretty obvious, which means we could probably go another magnitude deeper, and we have in the past, so that shouldn't be surprising. It would be nice to turn up a 17th magnitude galaxy, though, under the right conditions. In the middle third of the sky, no moon, clear with minimal water vapor, that kind of thing. So, we'll do a couple more, and then we're going to carpe noctem out. Well, what you're seeing here is another deep southie, minus 34 degrees 35 minutes. NGC 6453 is a globular cluster in Scorpius, magnitude 10.2, 3.5. It's fairly condensed at a class 4 of 12, 36,000 light years distant, clearly on the other far side of our Milky Way galaxy. Minus 34 degrees, as mentioned before. Not pushing the envelope particularly, except in terms of sky position. So, rather than leaving on this one, let's go ahead and make one more shot at trying to turn up 6256, that 11th plus magnitude globular. That would be really nice to nail down. So, taking this camera off. Well, I do believe, looking at the screen, it's paying off. Consistently, this particular deep south globular ghost has appeared right about there at the tip of my finger. So I would say we can declare success on this one. Despite the fact it's at minus 37 degrees, it is culminating right at this moment, which means just above the pear tree and above the hills to the south. NGC 6256, a globular cluster in Scorpius, magnitude 11.3, 1.2 arc minutes, 30,000 light years distant. There is, no indication here because it says the brightest star is also 11.3, so that doesn't quite work. And it doesn't give a class, but looking at it, it would appear as though there is a sense of core. Well, let's say it's a middling globular cluster. Pretty much just over the border on the far side of the Milky Way. And with that success, I am about to say carpe noctem, but I'm going to give it a few more seconds for that image quality to improve. But it doesn't look like it will. The stars are diffuse, so is the globular. But we are looking through an awful lot of atmosphere. I mean, in terms of vertically, you got about maybe 20 miles of atmosphere you have to look through, but when you start looking horizontally, it's got to be in the range of 40 to 50. So you lose a good deal of transparency and clarity when you're looking due south, just above the horizon. Adios and carpe noctem.